When cold, calculating and commanding billionaire Callum Knight's empire is threatened by a scandal, he strikes a dangerous bargain. A fake engagement to Quinn Brookes, a woman whose fiery spirit defies every rule he's built his life on. What begins as a calculated deception soon spirals into a battle of hearts, where pretending may be the most dangerous risk of all. Welcome to our channel. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The morning air in Callum Knight's penthouse office was thick with tension, as if even the glass walls were bracing for impact. Sunlight glared against the skyline of London, too bright, too sharp for the mood that had settled inside. Callum sat at the head of the polished oak conference table, scrolling through the digital front page of every major outlet. Each headline carried the same venom. Knight Industries under fire, billionaire heir reckless or ruthless? Mystery woman wild night, Callum Knight spotted in scandalous affair. Is London's most eligible bachelor out of control? His jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. It was astonishing how fast a single night, one drink, one misplaced photograph with a stranger leaning too close, could spiral into a wildfire of speculation. He'd built his empire on precision and control. Now the image of him, blurred and damning, was plastered everywhere. "This is a nightmare," Callum muttered, dropping his phone onto the table with a sharp clatter. "You're not wrong," came the dry voice of his assistant, Harriet Steele, who had worked with him for nearly a decade. Nothing rattled her, not boardroom meltdowns, not hostile takeovers, not even the icy temper of Callum Knight. She smoothed the lapel of her charcoal suit and glanced over her notes with clinical calm. "The board is demanding a statement," she continued. "Investors are nervous. Knight Industries is negotiating the renewable energy deal with the Crown. This scandal is ammunition for your competitors. If you appear unstable, if you appear like a man who can't keep his personal life in order," Callum cut in, his voice low, "then the deal evaporates." Harriet's silence was answer enough. Callum leaned back in his chair, pressing his palms together beneath his chin. Reputation had always been his sharpest weapon. Ruthless, controlled, untouchable, that was the Callum Knight brand. And now it was bleeding out in the tabloids. "There's only one thing worse than scandal," Harriet said after a long pause. Silence. He glanced up at her. "I'm not feeding them more than they already have." "I'm not suggesting that," she replied, her tone clipped. "I'm suggesting a strategy. A diversion." He arched a brow. "Go on." "You need something stronger than a denial," she said, her voice gaining momentum, as though the plan had been waiting in the back of her mind all along. "You need stability. Respectability. The press feeds on chaos. Give them the opposite. Give them a story that rewrites the narrative before this one destroys you." Callum's patience was thin. "And what exactly is this miracle story?" Harriet's lips curved in the faintest smirk. "You're getting married." The words landed with such absurd weight that for the first time that morning, Callum barked out a laugh. It was humorless, sharp, and short-lived. "You've finally lost your mind." "I've never been more sane," Harriet countered. She tapped her pen against her notepad, eyes gleaming with the kind of focus that made her indispensable. "Think about it. A man in love. A whirlwind romance. An engagement that silences the rumors before they can sink their claws deeper. Instead of reckless billionaire, you become devoted fiancé. Instead of scandal, we feed them fairy tale." Callum's amusement vanished. "You're suggesting I lie to the entire world. To the Crown." "I'm suggesting you control the story before it controls you," Harriet said crisply. "Marriages of convenience aren't new in your world. It's business, not sentiment. We'll find someone suitable, someone discreet, and in 6 months' time you quietly part ways. In the meantime, your reputation is spotless and your deal is secure." Callum's mind moved with the speed of a strategist, dissecting angles. A fiancé would make the paparazzi frenzy dissolve into glossy spreads of engagement rings and smiling photographs. Investors would relax. The board would see a man ready for permanence, not chaos. But the thought of shackling himself to someone, even on paper, was like swallowing broken glass. "I don't do relationships," he said flatly. "You wouldn't be doing a relationship. You'd be doing damage control." Harriet's voice softened, almost coaxing now. It's temporary. Controlled. Claim. And entirely in your favor. He studied her, the cool gleam of his assistant's certainty reflected in the glass walls. Harriet never gambled without odds stacked in her favor. Still, the idea seemed almost grotesque. Marriage had been the last thing on his mind, and now she wanted him to parade a fake one in front of the world? Who? He asked at last, a bitter edge to the single syllable. Which suitable, discreet woman do you think will agree to something so insane? That, Harriet said, gathering her papers into a neat pile, is what I'll start working on immediately. But mark my words, Callum, this is the only move that saves your empire. He exhaled, the sound rough. A fake engagement. Her gaze sharpened. Not fake. Strategic. For a long moment, the room was silent but for the faint hum of the city outside. Callum stared at the skyline, at the life he'd built brick by ruthless brick. To let it all crumble because of one reckless photograph was unthinkable. He hated that Harriet was right. Find me someone, he said at last, his voice low and dangerous. But she'd better be able to play the part. A rare smile flickered across Harriet's face. Leave that to me. And with that, the impossible idea took root, one that would soon bring Quinn Brookes crashing into his life, a woman whose wild heart would unravel every rule Callum Knight had ever lived by. Quinn Brookes wasn't used to silence. Her life was usually a symphony of sound, music humming through her headphones, laughter echoing from friends, the buzz of the city always in her ears. But this morning, silence was all she had. She sat at the chipped wooden counter of the cafe where she worked part-time, scribbling sketches on the back of an order pad. Her boss, Mrs. Klein, had disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Quinn alone with the comforting hiss of the espresso machine. Her pencil danced across the page, not drawing cups or croissants like she was supposed to, but the outline of a wild, sprawling garden. She wasn't sure what it meant, just that her restless heart demanded it. Quinn had always been like that. Uncontained. Improvised. She was a woman who moved with her instincts, not with a schedule. Which explained why, at 27, she was still piecing life together. Art classes she couldn't afford. Odd jobs that barely paid rent. A dating life that oscillated between catastrophic and non-existent. Her friends called her reckless. Quinn preferred the word free. The bell above the cafe door chimed, pulling her attention up. And just like that, silence shattered. Because the man who stepped in carried the kind of presence that warped the air around him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. His gaze swept the cafe, sharp and assessing, before landing on her. For half a heartbeat, Quinn forgot to breathe. Then reality kicked in. Whoever he was, he didn't belong here. Coffee? She asked, sliding her sketch out of sight and grabbing a notepad. The man's expression didn't shift, though up close his eyes were colder than she expected. Steel gray, unreadable. Black. No sugar. Of course, Quinn said lightly, masking her instinctive irritation at his tone. Like he was issuing orders, not placing an order. She moved to the machine, her curls bouncing against her shoulders as she worked. Are you Quinn Brookes? He asked suddenly. Her hand stilled on the coffee pot. That depends. Who's asking? Callum Knight. The name hung in the air, heavy with recognition. Even if Quinn had never followed business news, she'd heard it. Knight Industries. Billionaire mogul. Tabloid heartbreaker. A man so often photographed with glamorous women that his life seemed like a rotating billboard of perfection. And here he was, in her cafe, saying her name. She turned, narrowing her eyes. If this is about the rent, I already told the landlord the boiler broke again. Not my fault. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by the faintest twitch of his lips. Not quite a smile. I'm not your landlord. I'm here on business. Quinn crossed her arms. What business could a man like you possibly have with a woman like me? Before he could answer, the door chimed again. Harriet Steele swept in, heels clicking against the floor, her sharp gaze cutting through the cozy atmosphere like a blade. She looked out of place too, sleek, polished, her presence as crisp as her assistant's badge of authority. Mr. Knight, Harriet said briskly, handing him a folder. I've arranged everything. She's perfect. Excuse me? Quinn demanded, looking between them. Callum regarded her steadily, as though measuring something in her stance, her tone, her defiance. Then, with the calmness of a man discussing quarterly profits, he said, I need you to pretend to be my fiancé. Quinn stared. Then she laughed. Loud, incredulous, uncontrollable. I'm sorry, what? You heard me, Callum replied unfazed. A temporary arrangement. In exchange, you'll be compensated more than fairly. Quinn blinked, trying to decide if she'd stumbled into a hidden camera show. So let me get this straight. You waltz into my cafe, know my name, and propose. What? Fake marriage? Like some bad soap opera plot. Harriet interjected smoothly. It's an engagement, not a marriage. Strictly business. You'll attend public events, pose for photographs, and help redirect the narrative surrounding Mr. Knight. In return, your financial worries vanish. The words financial worries pricked like a needle. Quinn hated the reminder. Rent due, bills stacked, the dream of an art studio slipping further away. But she hated even more the assumption that she could be bought. She planted both hands on the counter. I don't care if you're richer than God. I'm not for sale. Something flickered in Callum's gaze at her defiance. Interest. Maybe even challenge. It wouldn't be a sale. It would be a contract. Mutual benefit. No, Quinn said firmly, though her pulse raced. Find someone else. Someone who cares about your little empire. Harriet's expression tightened, but Callum didn't argue. Instead, he slid a sleek black business card across the counter. Think about it, he said simply. You may find freedom costs more than you realize. Quinn stared at the card as they turned to leave, her reflection catching in its glossy surface. Callum Knight, billionaire, arrogant, untouchable, and apparently insane. Yet as the cafe door closed behind them, Quinn's wild heart thudded in her chest, whispering something she didn't want to admit, that for the first time in a long time she felt alive. Quinn had promised herself she wouldn't call the number. For 3 days, she tossed the sleek black business card from one corner of her apartment to another like it was cursed. She buried it under a stack of unpaid bills, stuffed it in her sketchbook, even considered burning it over the gas stove. But somehow the card always resurfaced, glossy, gleaming, taunting. By the fourth night, curiosity won. Or maybe desperation. Or maybe just that gnawing voice in her chest whispering, what if? Which was why, at precisely 8 o'clock the next morning, Quinn found herself in the glass and steel headquarters of Knight Industries, standing in front of a receptionist who looked at her as though she'd wandered in barefoot. Mr. Knight is expecting you, the woman said smoothly, leading her toward a set of heavy double doors. Expecting her. Quinn bristled at the assumption. She hadn't agreed to anything yet. The office beyond was cavernous, all sharp lines and understated wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the room with sunlight, casting Callum Knight in a halo of power as he stood by his desk. He was already in motion, jacket off, sleeves rolled, tie loosened. Even without the armor of perfection, he looked devastatingly composed. Miss Brookes, he said, his voice like steel dipped in honey. I wasn't sure you'd come. Trust me, Quinn shot back, dropping into the leather chair opposite his desk. I'm not sure either. He gave her the faintest hint of a smile before sliding a folder toward her. Then let me clarify. Quinn flipped the folder open. Inside was a typed contract, neat as a guillotine blade. Terms, conditions, dates, compensation, even a non-disclosure clause. Her eyes widened. You actually drew up paperwork? She asked. This is business, Callum said. I don't leave things to chance. Quinn leaned back, folding her arms. You want me to play your doting fiancé, smile for cameras, survive a parade of gala dinners and cocktail parties? And in exchange, she skimmed the page. You'll pay me enough to solve every problem I've ever had. Exactly. Wow. Quinn shut the folder with a snap. It's so romantic I could swoon. Callum's lips twitched. Romance is irrelevant. What matters is that we both get what we need. And what if I say no? She challenged. Then you go back to working 3 jobs and sketching gardens on receipt pads. His gaze was sharp but not unkind. Tell me I'm wrong. Quinn bristled. You make it sound pathetic. I make it sound real. Here's what's real, she fired back. I don't take orders from men who think they can buy people like furniture. A long silence stretched between them, humming with tension. Then, unexpectedly, Callum chuckled. Low, deep, disarming. You're not what I expected. Good, Quinn said. I'd hate to be predictable. He studied her like she was a puzzle, one he wasn't used to struggling with. Most people bent under the weight of his authority. Quinn, it seemed, had made herself immune. "I need someone the press won't suspect," he said at last. "Someone who doesn't run in my circles. Someone real. That's why I came to you." Quinn arched a brow. "So I'm what?" "The authentic poor girl to your billionaire prince act." "Don't cheapen yourself," Callum said. His voice softened just slightly. "You were unforgettable the moment you laughed in my face." For half a second, Quinn felt something skip in her chest. Dangerous. She shoved it down. "Flattery won't work, Knight. Try again." "Fine." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes locking with hers. "I'll be blunt. This arrangement benefits us both. You want freedom, from bills, from uncertainty, from limits. I want stability, from scandal, from rumors, from chaos. Together we get it." Quinn drummed her nails on the folder, pretending to think. In truth, her pulse was hammering. He wasn't wrong. One signature could erase years of struggle. But at what cost? "I'd have rules," she said finally. Callum raised an eyebrow. "Rules?" "Yes. Rule 1. No actual kissing unless it's in public and you absolutely need it for your big show." His mouth curved faintly. "You think I'd want to kiss you? You look like the type who thinks kissing is a contract clause. And you look like the type who'd make it impossible to stop." Heat rushed to Quinn's cheeks before she could stop it. Damn him. "Rule 2, she pressed on, ignoring the spark in his eyes. "I keep my life. My friends, my art, my space. You don't get to own me outside the spotlight." "Agreed." "And Rule 3, Quinn leaned in, mimicking his posture. "If you so much as try to boss me around, I'm gone. No amount of money will keep me." Callum studied her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "Deal." Quinn eyed it like it might bite her. "You really think this is going to work?" "I know it will," he said smoothly. "Because neither of us can afford for it not to." Her hand slid into his, the contact sparking something neither of them wanted to name. For the first time in her life, Quinn Brookes had agreed to something utterly insane. And for the first time in his, Callum Knight had no idea how dangerous a woman's wild heart could be. Quinn's hand was trapped in Callum's like a hostage. The flash of cameras erupted the moment they stepped out of the sleek black car. The hotel's marble steps transformed into a battlefield of flashing bulbs and eager whispers. Quinn squinted against the onslaught, wishing she'd worn sunglasses, or maybe a disguise. "Just smile," Callum murmured beside her, his breath brushing her ear. She turned her head slightly, lips curving into the most saccharine grin she could muster. "If I smile any harder, my face will crack. Better that than looking like you're being marched to the gallows." "That's exactly what this feels like," Quinn muttered, though her grip on his arm tightened instinctively as the crowd pressed closer. They ascended the steps together, Callum exuding the effortless control of a man who had walked this stage 1,000 times before. He was maddeningly composed, every inch the billionaire Prince Charming the cameras loved. Anne Quinn, dark-skinned, curvy, her usual halo of curls now straightened, scarlet dress, felt every eye dissecting her. "She's stunning." Not his usual type. "Who is she?" The whispers carried even over the chaos of the press. Quinn forced herself to keep walking, chin high, heart pounding. Inside the glittering ballroom, things weren't much easier. Crystal chandeliers threw light across a sea of gowns and tuxedos. The air smelled of champagne and money. Everywhere Quinn turned, there were watchful eyes, sly smiles, and the unmistakable gleam of judgment. Callum guided her through it with the unflinching poise of a general leading troops. "Champagne?" he asked, steering her toward a waiter. "Please," Quinn hissed, snatching a glass the moment the tray appeared. She downed half in one gulp. Callum arched a brow. "Pace yourself. You don't want the press thinking my fiancé has a drinking problem." She glared at him over the rim of her glass. "You really know how to charm a woman, Knight? And you really know how to test a man's patience." Their bickering was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Harrington, one of Callum's most influential investors. His gaze flicked between them with polished interest. "Callum. And you must be the lovely Quinn Brookes. I was beginning to think you'd invented her." "Not at all," Callum said smoothly, his hand tightening slightly around hers. "Quinn is very real." Quinn smiled, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. "So real I still have rent to pay," she quipped, earning a startled laugh from Lord Harrington. Callum's jaw flexed. "She has a sharp tongue," he said dryly. And a sharper brain, Quinn added sweetly. The older man chuckled, clearly entertained by the exchange. She'll keep you on your toes, Knight? That's a good thing. When Harrington drifted off, Callum turned on her with a glare. Do you have any idea how dangerous it is to make comments like that in this crowd? Quinn lifted a shoulder. Dangerous? Please, I thought you liked danger. Isn't that why we're here? He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. We're here because my company depends on it. Because your role is to convince them I'm a man worth trusting. And my role, she shot back, is not to be some mute mannequin on your arm. For a moment, their gazes locked, the friction between them sparking hotter than the chandelier light. Then, as if summoned, a photographer approached. Mr. Knight, Miss Brookes, could we get a picture? Callum's hand slid around Quinn's waist, pulling her flush against him before she could protest. The camera clicked as he dipped his head toward her, his lips brushing her temple. The heat of his touch seared through her. Quinn froze, her practiced smile faltering for a split second before she recovered. When the photographer left, she shoved lightly at his chest. What was that? A performance, Callum said evenly. Convincing, wasn't it? Convincing. That was one word for it. Another might be dangerous. Quinn excused herself to the balcony, needing air. She leaned against the cool stone railing, city lights glittering below, her chest tight. This was supposed to be an act, a charade. But every time Callum touched her, it felt less like play acting and more like temptation. You're running, came his voice behind her. She turned to find him leaning in the doorway, tie loosened, eyes glinting in the dim light. I'm cooling off, she retorted. Which, by the way, is necessary when someone decides to manhandle you for the cameras. You're overreacting, he said. And you're overconfident, she countered. He stepped closer until the distance between them shrank to a few breaths. You knew what you signed up for, Quinn. The press won't believe this unless they see it. Feel it? Her pulse jumped. Then maybe you should have hired an actress. I didn't want an actress. His voice was low now, steady, dangerous. I wanted you. The words unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She forced a laugh, tilting her chin defiantly. Careful, Knight. You almost sound sincere. He held her gaze for a long, charged moment. Then, with infuriating calm, he stepped back. Come inside. The night isn't over. Quinn exhaled only when he turned away. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady the wild thrum of her heart. If this was just business, why did it feel like she was the one losing control? The following week blurred into a whirlwind of appearances. Luncheons, ribbon cuttings, charity galas. Everywhere they went, Callum and Quinn were photographed, scrutinized, and dissected. The tabloids called it a whirlwind romance. Society blogs gushed about how smitten they looked. Quinn found the whole thing absurd. She wasn't smitten. She was surviving. Or at least, she told herself that every time Callum's hand lingered on her back, every time his eyes caught hers across a crowded room, every time their laughter slipped out between stiff smiles. Tonight was supposed to be another performance, just one more step in the charade. A dinner party hosted by one of Callum's business partners. The kind of event Quinn dreaded, polished silverware, whispered politics, and an audience eager to poke holes in her disguise. She adjusted her emerald dress in the mirror of Callum's town car, tugging at the neckline. I look like I'm about to attend a coronation. You look perfect, Callum said simply, not even glancing up from his phone. Quinn rolled her eyes. Perfect is boring. His lips quirked. Not when you do it. The compliment landed before she could deflect it. For a moment, warmth flickered in her chest. She quickly shoved it down, focusing instead on the gaudy chandelier of the mansion as they entered. The dinner began like all the others. Introductions, champagne, endless polite questions. Quinn put on her brightest smile, weaving charm into her answers, tossing in humor where Callum's cool composure couldn't reach. To her surprise, the guests seemed enchanted, not just by the billionaire at her side but by her. Miss Brookes, one of the wives said, leaning across the table, however did you meet? Quinn opened her mouth to give the rehearsed answer, but Callum beat her to it. She spilled coffee on me, he said, voice smooth. Most expensive suit I've ever owned. I should have been furious, but instead, I was captivated. Quinn nearly choked on her wine. She turned to him, eyes wide, trying not to laugh. That's not how it happened. No. Callum asked innocently, though a spark of mischief glimmered in his gray eyes. She leaned closer, whispering so only he could hear. "You're rewriting history now? Would you rather I tell them you mocked me to my face?" Quinn smirked. That would have been the truth. For the rest of the evening, the story of their romance wove itself through the table, each guest asking for more details, each glance between Quinn and Callum drawing deeper smiles from the crowd. By dessert, the room was buzzing with approval. When they finally escaped to the terrace for air, Quinn collapsed against the railing, laughing softly. "I can't believe they bought all of that." "They didn't just buy it," Callum said, joining her under the soft glow of garden lights. "They adored it. You make it sound like we're actors on stage. Aren't we?" She tilted her head, studying him. "Maybe. But you actually looked like you meant it." Something flickered across his face then, not the mask of control she was used to, not the icy detachment, but something quieter, softer. For a moment she saw a man stripped of armor. "Maybe I did," he murmured. The words hung between them, heavier than the warm summer air. Quinn's throat tightened. She wanted to laugh it off, toss some witty retort to break the tension, but the truth was she felt it too. The way her stomach flipped when he smiled. The way her pulse skipped when his hand brushed hers. Dangerous. She pulled back first, breaking the spell. "Careful, Knight. You're starting to blur the lines." He gave a small, rueful smile. Maybe the lines deserve to be blurred. Her heart stuttered. But before she could respond, a voice called from inside, summoning them back to the glittering world of chandeliers and polished conversations. Later, as the town car drove them home, Quinn sat in silence, watching the city lights smear against the window. Callum sat beside her, his hand resting casually on the seat between them, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating. She knew this was supposed to be fake. A performance. A contract. And yet, when his fingers brushed hers lightly, almost accidentally, she didn't pull away. Quinn had never known exhaustion like this. Not from work shifts or late nights painting until her hands cramped, but from smiling until her cheeks ached, from walking in heels that pinched, from pretending to belong in a world that watched her like a specimen under glass. It had now been 3 weeks since the engagement announcement, and her life had become a carousel of charity galas, business dinners, and photo ops. Each event left her more drained than the last, though she'd never admit it out loud, not when Callum was watching so closely. Tonight was no different. The dinner at the Knight family's countryside estate had stretched on for hours, every course another test, every toast another reminder that she was an outsider. By the time they returned to his penthouse, Quinn kicked off her heels with a groan. "If one more person asked me where we met, I was going to scream." Callum loosened his tie, unbothered. "You handled it well." "Handled it? I nearly told your great-aunt that we bonded over a bar fight." He smirked faintly. "It would have been more interesting than the story Harriet fed you." Quinn dropped onto the sofa, tugging at her dress zipper until it gave. "Why do people care so much about us, anyway? Who we are, what we do, it's like they're vultures circling." "Because they thrive on spectacle," Callum said, pouring himself a glass of scotch. He hesitated, then poured a second and handed it to her. "Tonight, we were the spectacle." She accepted it, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact jolted her more than the alcohol. "Doesn't it bother you? Being picked apart like that?" He took a sip, his jaw tightening. "I learned a long time ago not to let it." Something in his tone made her study him. Callum Knight, master of control, suddenly seemed less untouchable. "That sounds lonely." He met her gaze, and for a heartbeat she saw past the armor, into something raw, vulnerable. Then it was gone, shuddered. "You get used to it," he said. Quinn leaned back, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. "I don't think I could. I'd rather be broke and free than rich and watched." "You say that now," Callum replied, though his voice lacked its usual sharpness. "But freedom costs, and so does survival." She tilted her head. "Is that why you work yourself to death? To survive?" His lips curved faintly, but there was no humor in it. "I work to win. Surviving is just a byproduct." Quinn studied him for a long moment. Beneath the billionaire mask there was a man driven by something darker. Fear, maybe, or pain. It made her chest ache in a way she didn't expect. "You know," she said softly, "you don't have to win everything." His gaze snapped to hers, sharp as a blade. "Don't I?" The silence stretched, heavy with all the things neither dared to say. Finally, Quinn broke it with a laugh, needing to breathe again. Well, if this is supposed to be an engagement, we're terrible at it. Normal couples take cute selfies and argue about Netflix, not battle each other with existential questions. Callum's mouth twitched. We could argue about Netflix if you'd like. What would you pick? She asked, knowing his response already. Documentaries, he said, confirming. Of course, she said, rolling her eyes. Something soulless and boring. And you? Rom-coms. The cheesier the better. He groaned. That's torture. No, that's balance, she countered. Every power-hungry billionaire needs a little fluff in his life. Their banter drew them closer without either of them noticing, until Quinn realized she was leaning into him, their knees brushing. The contact sent a spark racing up her leg and she jerked back, hiding it with another gulp of scotch. Careful, Callum murmured, watching her. You're starting to sound like you're enjoying this arrangement. She met his gaze, defiant. Careful, Knight. You're starting to sound like you want me to. The air between them tightened, electric. Neither moved, but the possibility of it hung there, heavy and undeniable. Quinn forced herself to stand, setting her glass down with more force than necessary. I'm going to bed. Alone. Because rule number 1 still stands. His eyes darkened, but he inclined his head. Of course. Good night, Miss Brookes. She turned, her heart pounding as she disappeared into the guest room Harriet had insisted she use whenever she stayed over. Behind the closed door, Quinn pressed her back against the wood, exhaling shakily. This was supposed to be pretend. Business. A performance. So why did it feel like the cracks in the facade were starting to let something terrifyingly real through? And why, God help her, did part of her want it to? Quinn didn't notice the man with the camera at first. She and Callum were leaving yet another charity gala, his hand firm at the small of her back, their smiles choreographed for the sea of flashing lights. She was just beginning to relax when, out of the corner of her eye, she caught a shadow slipping away from the crowd, camera still raised, lens fixed squarely on her. Her stomach dipped. It wasn't unusual to be photographed, but something about the man's focus felt different. Less glamour shot, more evidence. Callum, she whispered, tugging at his sleeve. We're being tailed. His eyes flicked in that direction, cool and calculating. He didn't break stride, didn't falter. To the world he was still the picture of elegance. But Quinn felt the subtle shift in his grip, the protective edge of steel. Get in the car, he murmured. The ride home was tense. Callum sat silent, scrolling rapidly through messages on his phone while Quinn stared out the tinted window. Finally she couldn't take it. Do you think he knows? Knows what? Callum asked, though his tone made it clear he understood. That this whole thing is fake. Her voice cracked slightly. Because if he does, if he prints something. He won't, Callum interrupted firmly. I'll see to it. Quinn bit her lip. His certainty should have reassured her, but instead it made her ache. Because no matter how much control Callum Knight commanded, some things couldn't be contained. Secrets had a way of clawing into the light. And Quinn had secrets too. The next morning, the tension hadn't eased. Harriet was already in Callum's office, phone glued to her ear, firing off sharp commands. The moment she saw Quinn, her eyes narrowed. The photographer works freelance, Harriet reported. Known for digging deeper than most. He's been paid before to uncover inconsistencies. Her gaze lingered on Quinn. We need to be careful. Quinn bristled. Careful how? By making sure there's nothing to uncover, Harriet replied. Callum shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. Quinn straightened, heat rising in her chest. You think I'm the weak link? I think the press will exploit anything they can, Harriet said coolly. If there are skeletons, now would be the time to bury them. Quinn's laugh was sharp, defensive. Funny thing about skeletons, they don't like staying buried. The silence that followed was heavy. Callum dismissed Harriet with a curt nod, then turned to Quinn. Is there something I should know? He asked quietly. Quinn met his gaze, her wild heart thundering. Memories flickered, late rent notices, estranged family, choices she didn't regret but couldn't quite explain. Things Callum's world would never understand. You hired me for authenticity, she said finally. Well, authenticity comes with mess. I'm not perfect, Callum. Not some polished debutante who looks good on your arm. I have a past. He studied her, face unreadable. So do I. The words startled her. She'd never thought of Callum as someone with shadows. He always seemed untouchable, sculpted from marble. But in his eyes now, she caught a flicker of something raw, something human. "Tell me," he said gently. Quinn shook her head, retreating into herself. "Not today." He didn't press. Instead, he crossed the room and poured 2 glasses of scotch. Handing one to her, he said simply, "Then when you're ready." The gesture disarmed her more than any demand could have. Later that evening, Quinn scrolled through her phone in her tiny apartment, Callum's words replaying in her mind. "When you're ready." He was giving her space. No one had ever done that before. But as she set her phone down, a notification pinged. A new article. Her chest tightened as she read the headline. "Who is Quinn Brookes? Knight's mysterious fiancé under the microscope." Her old life spilled out across the screen, grainy photos, half-truths twisted into scandal. A dropout. A waitress. A girl from nowhere. Quinn's vision blurred. It wasn't her past that hurt, it was the thought of how Callum might see it. For the first time, she wondered if she was strong enough to survive this game. The rain came down in relentless sheets, rattling against the glass walls of Callum's penthouse like impatient fingers. Quinn stood at the window, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the blur of the city lights. Everything felt muffled, the storm, her thoughts, the faint hum of classical music playing in the background. She had told herself she was ready for this life, ready to play the part of Callum Knight's fiancé. But after weeks of dinners, galas, and whispered speculation, she wasn't sure how much more of the act she could endure. Behind her, Callum was the picture of control, seated in a leather armchair with a tumbler of whiskey balanced in his hand. He'd shed his jacket, undone his tie, and rolled his sleeves to the elbow. He looked less like the billionaire the world admired and more like a man who had dropped his armor, if only for a moment. "You've been pacing for 10 minutes, he said without looking up. "If you keep it up, you'll wear a hole in my floor." Quinn turned, bristling. "Forgive me for having nerves. Not everyone was born to live under a spotlight." He finally glanced up at her, his gray eyes unreadable. "You're handling it better than you think. Tell that to the tabloids," she muttered, moving toward the kitchen island. She poured herself water just for something to do, though her hands trembled slightly as she set the glass down. Callum rose and crossed the room in that deliberate way of his, every step measured like nothing could rattle him. He stopped a breath away, and suddenly the air between them seemed charged, heavy with something neither of them wanted to name. "You can't let them win," he said quietly. "If you doubt yourself, they've already gotten what they wanted." Quinn looked up at him, her pulse hammering. "Why do you care so much if I crack? You can find another woman tomorrow to wear the ring and smile for the cameras." His jaw tightened, and for the first time she saw a flicker of frustration beneath his calm. "You think this is easy for me? That I can replace you like a business transaction? Isn't that what this was to begin with?" The silence that followed was deafening. Rain pounded harder against the glass, like the storm itself was waiting for an answer. Finally Callum said low and steady, "It stopped being business a long time ago." Quinn's throat went dry. She wanted to laugh, to push him away with some sharp remark, but her body betrayed her. Her heart thudded painfully, so loud she swore he could hear it. "Callum," she whispered. His name on her lips broke something in him. He stepped closer, so close she had to tilt her chin up to meet his gaze. The storm outside flared with lightning, illuminating the raw hunger in his eyes. "You feel it too," he said, not a question but a certainty. Quinn tried to move, to retreat into the safety of distance, but her back brushed the counter. There was nowhere to go. "This is dangerous," she murmured. "Then let it be dangerous." His voice was rougher now, fraying at the edges. Her breath hitched. She thought of all the reasons this was a mistake. The tabloids, the fake engagement, the risk of falling for a man who could break her in 1,000 ways. But when he lifted his hand, brushing a stray curl from her cheek with a tenderness that disarmed her completely, her resolve shattered. The storm outside raged, thunder cracking across the skyline, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. "Say the word and I'll stop," Callum murmured, his hand lingering just below her jaw. Quinn closed her eyes, fighting the war inside her. Logic screamed for distance, but her heart, her wild, reckless heart, betrayed her with a single whisper. "Don't." When she opened her eyes again, his expression had changed. The controlled, calculated Callum Knight was gone. In his place was a man stripped bare, standing on the same trembling precipice she was. He didn't kiss her, not yet. Instead, he stepped back slightly, dragging in a ragged breath. "If I cross this line, Quinn, there's no undoing it. Are you ready for that?" Her chest tightened. She wasn't ready. Not at all. But for the first time she wanted to be. The words caught in her throat, fragile and dangerous. "Maybe I don't want undoing." Callum's gaze darkened, the last of his restraint unraveling. But before he could move, the sound of her phone buzzing violently on the counter broke the moment. Quinn startled, her heart slamming back into rhythm. The screen lit up with Harriet's name. She stared at it, then at Callum. Neither of them moved to answer. The air between them throbbed with what almost happened, what still could. Finally, Quinn grabbed her phone, forcing a shaky laugh. Saved by the assistant. Guess fate has a sense of humor. But Callum didn't laugh. He watched her with that same steady, searing gaze, as if reminding her that the storm between them wasn't over. It was only waiting. And Quinn knew, deep in her chest, that the next time the line blurred, there would be no stopping it. The storm had passed, but the night still held its charge. Quinn sat curled on the sofa in Callum's penthouse, her legs tucked beneath her. The lights were low, the city glittering beyond the glass, but she felt exposed in a way she never had before. Not because of cameras. Not because of tabloids. But because of him, watching her from across the room as though she was the only truth he had left. "You've been quiet," Callum said at last, his voice careful, as though he feared a wrong move might send her running. Quinn gave a brittle laugh. "You don't know what to say when I'm not throwing some sarcastic jab at you, do you?" "On the contrary." He set down his glass and crossed the room with deliberate steps. "I'm waiting for you to say what you've been holding back since the day we met." Her heart stuttered. She wanted to deflect, to retreat into humor, but she was so damn tired of hiding. "You don't want to hear it," she whispered. "Try me." Callum lowered himself onto the sofa beside her. Not too close, but close enough that his warmth reached her, grounding and dangerous all at once. His eyes, gray, sharp, impossible to escape, urged her forward. Quinn drew in a shaky breath. "You think the headlines bother me because they're cruel? But the truth is, they're not entirely wrong." She twisted her fingers in her lap, unable to meet his gaze. "I didn't grow up with money or connections or polish. My mom worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. My dad," her throat closed for a moment. "My dad walked out when I was 12, said he was going to the store and never came back." The silence stretched, the confession hanging heavy between them. Quinn blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. "I learned real quick not to rely on anyone. Not friends, not men, not family. Because when you do, they vanish. And if the world sees me as some charity case who clawed her way into your life for money," she forced a brittle smile, "well, maybe that's easier for them to believe than the truth." Her voice cracked at the last word. She hated that. Callum's jaw flexed, but he didn't look away. He reached out, his hand brushing hers gently, giving her space to pull back if she wanted. She didn't. "Quinn," he said softly, "none of that makes you less. It makes you stronger than anyone I've ever met." She shook her head, her walls trembling. "You don't understand." "No," his voice sharpened, steady and certain. "I do. I know what it's like to be left behind. My parents weren't saints. They loved their reputation more than their son. I built everything I have from the ground up, not because I wanted their approval, but because I had to prove I didn't need it." Her eyes widened. For the first time she saw not Callum the billionaire, not Callum the strategist, but a man who knew the ache of abandonment, who carried wounds of his own. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly brushing hers. "You and I, we're not broken, Quinn. We're survivors. And I'll be damned if I let anyone reduce you to a headline." The tears came then, hot and unbidden. She tried to turn away, but Callum caught her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Don't hide from me," he murmured. And before she could think, before she could throw up another wall, his lips found hers. The kiss wasn't polite or careful. It was fire and release, years of hunger neither of them had dared to admit. Quinn melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as if anchoring herself to something real for the first time in her life. Callum groaned against her mouth, deepening the kiss, pulling her flush against him. The world outside, the glittering skyline, the whispers of the storm, fell away until there was nothing but the heat of his body and the pounding of her heart. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Quinn rested her forehead against his chest, her voice trembling. "This isn't supposed to be real." "It already is," Callum whispered fiercely. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I don't want the charade anymore. Not for my reputation. Not for appearances. I want you. All of you. Your past, your scars, your wild heart." Her throat tightened painfully. No one had ever chosen her like this. Not for what she could do for them, not for what she pretended to be, but for who she was. "Callum." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise written in warmth and steady hands. When he finally drew back, his forehead rested against hers. "From this moment, Quinn, I don't care what anyone says. This engagement isn't fake anymore. It's ours. And if you'll let me, I'll spend every day proving that you belong by my side, not because the world needs to see it, but because I need you there." Her tears broke into a laugh, shaky and disbelieving. "You realize how insane that sounds, right?" He grinned, rare and unguarded. "Then I guess we'll be insane together." And for the first time, Quinn let herself believe. The storm had passed, but inside Callum's arms she finally understood. This was the beginning of something real. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the smallest steps lead to the biggest changes. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe and join us for more stories that prove compassion can change the world.